Discover the amazing transformative journey of the Odyssey, 10 incredible lessons revealed. Sarah stood before her classroom and felt the familiar weight of discontent settling on her shoulders. The glossy posters of literary legends hung expectantly on the walls, yet an invisible barrier seemed to separate her from the bright-eyed students she once inspired. Her heart pounded against her chest as she glanced out at their disinterested faces. In a small Midwestern town where dreams felt as threadbare as the school's funding, she often questioned if her efforts made any difference at all. No matter how passionately she taught the intricate lessons woven into the fabric of the Odyssey, the deeper struggles of her students' families torn apart, financial stresses, and dashed hopes hovered like ominous clouds, obscuring any light of inspiration. Every day, Sarah fought against the tide of economic despair, her resolve unwavering but her spirit fraying. She faced not only the apathy of her students but squabbles amongst school board members that paralyzed any chance of creative teaching. Budget cuts sliced through the supplies she relied on, and she constantly worried about how to make literature come alive without the resources to do so. Furtive glances from her principal and the patter of whispers in break rooms added to her unease, each hinting at a lurking scandal and a precarious future for the very passion she dedicated her life to. Amidst the haze of bureaucracy, Sarah's internal conflict sharpened. She felt like a ghost in her own life, haunting the corridors of a school that was slowly losing its soul. With dreams deferred and ambitions buried beneath layers of daily chaos, she wrestled with her fading sense of purpose. Could she be more than just a measured voice imparting knowledge? Could literature still shape her own narrative? She thought of her former student, now a best-selling author, who had promised to return and bring illumination to the struggles they all faced. His words were a lifeline, but would they be enough? Before we continue, I need to tell you about something important that's happening. YouTube has been making changes to the system and many people are losing notifications from channels they follow. If you're enjoying the content, click the bell and mark all notifications so you don't miss the next videos. And if you can leave a like, it really helps with reach. Seriously, it makes a difference. Oh, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I'm always curious to know who's on the other side of the screen. Now let's continue. As the day approached, anticipation twisted in her stomach, excitement mingled with dread about seeing the accomplished author who had once sat in the very desks currently occupied by her disillusioned pupils. An electric energy filled the classroom, one that reminded her of better days, but shadows of uncertainty lingered. What if he couldn't reignite their passion? What if he illuminated truths about their struggles that felt too real, too painful to confront? With each day, the pressure mounted, and she could feel the school administration's political storm brewing overhead. When scandal erupted, a teacher's unethical behavior revealed she was drawn into the maelstrom, caught between outrage for her students and fear for her own stability. What did standing up for integrity mean in a system hungry for silence? As the noise of the rumor mill grew louder, Sarah hesitated, torn between voicing her truth and caving under the weight of fear. Would the courage she sought deepen her impact, or would it dismantle her already fragile position? As she prepared for the school board meeting, her anxiety almost suffocated her, a cacophony of what-ifs thrumming in her mind. Would she summon the strength to finally confront the injustices stifling her students' futures, putting everything on the line including her own? The choices ahead loomed large, casting shadows across her ambitions, and she felt the precipice of decision just out of reach, ready to tip her world into chaos. The air felt thick on the day of the school board meeting, an electric tension crackling through the dimly lit hall. Sarah took a deep breath, her fingertips brushing against the nerve-wracking sheaf of notes she had meticulously prepared. The echoes of her previous doubts swirled in her mind, a relentless tide that threatened to pull her under, yet, there was an ember of determination glowing within her. This was not merely a meeting about policy or budgets, it was about her students' futures, and for the first time in what felt like an eternity, she was resolved to speak up. Scanning the room, she noted the familiar faces: parents, educators, and board members, each cloaked in their own complex struggles. They were waiting for what she had to say. Their expressions were a mix of skepticism and hope, mirroring her own internal conflict. Could her words pierce through the bureaucracy? Could they ignite a shift so desperately needed in the culture of despair surrounding her school? As the meeting commenced, Sarah's heart raced. She listened as the principal delivered his usual platitudes about the importance of education despite dwindling resources. Each statement felt like a hollow echo of the truth, a veil over the stark reality her students faced daily. A fire began to burn brighter within her as she raised her hand, her voice trembling at first as she requested to address the board. "Mr. Thompson, members of the board," she began, her voice gaining strength with each word, "I cannot stand idly by while our students suffer. We are tasked with nurturing their potential, yet we deny them the very resources necessary to spark their imaginations. These aren't just statistics, they are lives, dreams waiting to be ignited." She could see a few heads nodding, but the dominant energy in the room remained distant. Sarah pressed on, sharing anecdotes of students whose faces lit up when literature connected with their realities, stories of resilience that deserved to be heard. For every disenchanted expression she spotted, she anticipated their pain and the gravity of their circumstances. How could anyone ignore their struggles? As she spoke, she noticed a subtle shift. A few board members leaned forward, engaged, the flicker of understanding passing through the room. Perhaps she was breaking through the fog of apathy. But each moment of hope was countered by doubt. Would it matter? Would they act on her pleas once the meeting adjourned? Would her words hang in the air, unresolved like an unfinished sentence? After her speech, silence hung, thick and pregnant with tension. The board members looked at one another, weighing her words. In that moment, Sarah realized this was a turning point not just for her students, but for herself. The fear that had once paralyzed her began to dissolve, revealing a clarity she hadn't felt in years. This wasn't about the fallout of her position, it was about fighting for what was right. Yet, as the discussion continued around her, a sinking realization emerged. Their responses were tentative, mired in the politics of budget cuts and facility repairs. The enthusiasm of her revelation seemed to dissipate, leaving behind the hard, cold truth. Even if her voice had sparked something inside her, the larger system felt immovable. Determined not to retreat into despair, Sarah envisioned what she could do next. Maybe her struggle wasn't just in this room, but in mobilizing her students to uncover their own power. Could this be the beginning of a new chapter, one where their stories and battles became intertwined with hers? As she collected her materials and prepared to leave the meeting, uncertainty loomed still. But one thing was crystal clear, she couldn't navigate this journey alone. With renewed purpose, she determined to meet with the author, her former student. Perhaps together they could collaborate, inspiring young minds and fueling hope like never before. Just then, a figure appeared in the doorway, someone she hadn't expected. The familiar face of her former student had arrived, with a curious smile yet intense gaze, ready to confront their shared past. What kind of impact would he have? The next chapter was poised to unfold, hanging like a question in the air. Sarah's heart skipped a beat as she recognized the young man stepping into the room. A vibrant energy simmered in his presence, infused with the memories of shared laughter and countless hours spent inspiring each other. His name slipped from her lips instinctively, Jason, a mixture of surprise and nostalgia. "Ms. Thompson," he greeted, his gaze steady yet open, as if he held a key to a door she hadn't yet discovered. "I heard about the meeting. I had to come." Movements rattled within her, a juxtaposition of warmth and apprehension twisted in her gut. This wasn't just any former student. Jason was a writer and artist transformed through the very literature Sarah had hoped would empower him. Yet, here they were in this moment of potential, and she suddenly felt vulnerable under the weight of expectations. "Thank you for coming," she replied, gesturing towards an empty chair, her thoughts racing ahead. What had he gleaned from the walls of their school? How did he view her struggle for their students? Would he see hope, or another attempt at a lost cause? Settling in, his composure exuded an unexpected confidence. "I wanted to hear you speak. I knew you would challenge them like you always did us." The gravity behind his words sent a ripple of both pride and anxiety through her. His respect was a currency she craved, but what did he see beyond the surface? Did he recognize the cracks forming in her resolve? "I've been writing," he continued, and Sarah leaned forward, intrigued. "Stories of our classmates, their dreams like you've taught us. But I've also noticed how many of them have drifted into silence. That's what brought me here." His admission resonated within her like a faded echo. He was reflecting her own fears about the painful realities their peers faced, the disillusionment that had seeped into their community. "And what do you propose?" she asked, her voice steadier than she felt. "I want to collaborate on a project." Jason's eyes brightened with conviction. "We can create a series of narratives showcasing their voices. It'll not only breathe life into their stories but also speak truth to the board. We can ignite change." A plan began to crystallize in her mind, yet it felt daunting. What if this endeavor required more than she could give? Could she bear the responsibility of reviving hope? "Do you really believe they'll listen?" Sarah questioned, a skeptical frown creasing her brow. "The board has been resistant for so long." Jason's response was instantaneous, tinged with fervor. "It's about more than just their interest, it's about driving the point home with our truth. We're all part of this narrative, and our words will help rewrite it." His passion was infectious, yet beneath it lay a sense of urgency that both intoxicated and terrified her. It sparked in her an idea, a platform where students could co-create, where their stories could unfold before the eyes of decision-makers, perhaps compelling them to act. But she halted for a moment, the enormity of the project settling heavily. Could she pull this off? Was she ready to take such a leap into the unknown? "We need more students involved," she stated, deliberating the implications. "Do you think they would trust us enough to share their experiences?" Jason nodded resolutely. "If we approach them authentically, they'll see it's for them. They want to be heard. You've always shown them the way." A surge of determination surged within Sarah. This could indeed be the catalyst for a transformative shift. Still, a nagging fear gripped her. What if their efforts only ended in disillusionment once again? As Jason shared his ideas, his enthusiasm flooded the room, weaving an urgency around her own thoughts. The sounds of the mundane school hallways faded away, replaced by a shared dream of lighting the pathway for those who felt unseen. They spent the next hour brainstorming. It was exhilarating yet exhausting. Each potential name, each query she posed, returned shot through with an uneasy thrill, binding them in this new mission. Just then, a question taunted her thoughts: what if you fail? But in the midst of this dialogue, another, more insistent truth emerged: she couldn't afford to collapse under her fears. For the first time, she felt more than a teacher, she was a catalyst, intertwined with her students' journeys. And as they began to draft a plan, an unsettling question arose: what sacrifices would they need to make to propel this vision forward? The tension hung heavy between them, a mixture of hope and doubt, as they prepared to step into the unknown together. Was she ready for what lay ahead? The clock on the wall ticked, and with each passing second, the stakes grew higher. The air in the room felt electric, charged with a notion that adventures awaited. Sarah couldn't shake the apprehension that accompanied the thrill of a new endeavor, wrestling with an inner dialogue that threatened to unravel her confidence. Jason's eyes held a spark that she found herself drawing strength from, yet self-doubt clawed at her mind. What if this vision crumbled like so many before it? They sketched rough outlines on the whiteboard, each idea more audacious than the last. Sarah felt alive within this collaborative space, echoing the same enthusiasm she'd ignited in her students over the years. Yet, a flicker of reluctance hovered just below the surface. "So how do we start gathering their stories?" she asked, grounding herself back in reality. "Let us host a workshop," Jason proposed, the suggestion gleaming like a beacon. "Create an environment where they feel safe to express themselves. We can break through those barriers of silence." His belief in the power of storytelling ignited a shared commitment, but uncertainty lingered. "Yes, but what if they're not ready?" Sarah countered, a tremor in her voice. There was a risk in exposing both their vulnerability and the harsh truths of their experiences. What if we pushed too hard? Jason's expression softened, yet his resolve remained unyielding. It's about giving them a choice. We guide, but ultimately, it's their narrative. We're here to honor their voices. In that moment, Sarah recognized the complexity of her role. It wasn't just a matter of teaching, it was about guidance, offering the potential of empowerment without imposing expectations. As she absorbed Jason's perspective, an unfamiliar sense of clarity washed over her, a realization that perhaps her own fears could fuel her students' courage. Okay. Let us move forward with that, she said, meeting his hopeful gaze. Suddenly, she felt like a pioneer stepping into uncharted territory, each heartbeat showcasing the exhilarating gamble of the unknown. In the days that followed, the prospect of the workshop loomed near, a tangible representation of both their ambitions and her underlying fears. Sarah drafted emails, created flyers, and arranged meeting spaces. Each task filled her with anticipation, yet moments of hesitation bubbled up. What if no one showed up? What if they did, and the stories shared were too painful to bear? As the workshop day arrived, the rustle of students filled the room while anxiety wrapped its tendrils around her. Bright, eager faces flowed in, yet also the weights of disillusionment and shielded hearts. It was now or never. Welcome everyone. Sarah began, her voice steady despite the turbulence inside her. Today is about you, your stories, your dreams. She glanced at Jason, whose calm demeanor comforted her. Together, they formed a collective force, ready to tackle the challenge. They introduced various storytelling prompts and exercises designed to coax out voices. The energy shifted slowly, laughter bubbled up occasionally, yet an undertone of serious reflection lingered. Sarah moved among the students, witnessing stifled stories flicker into existence, some lighting up the room, others casting shadows of grief and longing. With every story shared, Sarah felt a new articulation of her own journey. She was simultaneously a witness and participant in this unfolding narrative. The breakthrough moment arrived when a usually quiet student began to speak, words spilling out like hesitant raindrops that transformed into a deluge. I want to tell everyone how it feels to be invisible," the student stammered, and Sarah's heart tightened at the raw honesty. As the session progressed, the emotional weight lifted, revealing a newfound camaraderie among the group. They were not alone in their struggles, they were interconnected through shared fears and dreams. With Jason's support, a genuine dialogue blossomed, giving Sarah the strength to push through her trepidation. Yet, as the first workshop came to a close, a deeper conflict emerged within her. The realization struck that their stories were sacred and powerful, but sharing them brought potential vulnerability to the forefront. What consequences might arise from unveiling their truths? "I never imagined we'd touch on such heavy stuff today," Jason noted as students trickled out, the energy palpable. "It was more than I anticipated," Sarah replied, her eyes reflecting a mix of pride and fear. They had opened a door, but it felt precarious, standing on the threshold between empowerment and exposure. "We'll need to tread carefully moving forward," Sarah said, her mind racing. "Agreed, but we can ensure that their voices echo, not erode their safety," Jason countered, his steady gaze a reminder of their mission. Navigating this uncharted path would demand resilience, but amid the swirl of uncertainty, Sarah's conviction solidified. They had a responsibility to honor these stories, to protect those stepping into the light. As they packed up, an unexpected feeling of elation surged within Sarah, a sense of purpose that lay beyond her teaching. Would she harness this transformative power, or would the weight of responsibility be too heavy? The stakes had never felt so personal. With a deep breath, she considered their next steps, how to balance the fragile lines of empowerment and invocation of change. What challenges awaited once they began to share these stories with a larger audience? The echo of her question lingered in the air, propelling her forward into an uncertain yet exhilarating future. The following week was a blur of preparation and introspection. Each day, Sarah found herself oscillating between exhilaration and dread. The workshop had awakened something deep within her, an ember of potential now sparking into a flame. Navigating the complexities of her students' stories had ignited memories of her own past, her mistakes, her triumphs, and the very stories that had shaped her identity. Yet, beneath the surface, doubt gnawed at her once more. Was she really capable of guiding these young minds with the wisdom they deserved? As she rifled through their anecdotes and reflections, a particular story lingered in her consciousness, a tale of resilience that mirrored her own. Sarah picked up her pen, detailing a moment from her childhood when she had felt utterly alone, wresting control over her narrative for the first time. Writing it down felt like a reclamation, a way to fortify herself against the specter of doubt. If I can share this, she thought, perhaps they will, too. Jason's unwavering dedication became a source of inspiration. He diligently worked on creating a supportive online platform where their stories could flourish. Each evening after work, they met to brainstorm ways to mitigate the risks while maximizing the empowerment that came from shared experiences. What if we include anonymous entries? He suggested during one session, his eyes lit by a flicker of innovation. It could provide a safe space for those who are hesitant to speak out but carry their own burdens. The idea resonated deeply with Sarah. It was a solution to their growing concerns about vulnerability, the perfect compromise between truth-telling and emotional safety. They decided to lead with this approach during their next workshop, focusing on the complexities of vulnerability and strength. However, as the day approached, Sarah's confidence wavered. The weight of her responsibility felt heavier than before. It was no longer just about facilitating stories, it was about ensuring that the stories recounted were safeguarded, respected, and honored. What would happen if someone shared something that led to backlash or harm? Could she wrest control over events that were inherently unpredictable? On the morning of the next workshop, she found herself pacing, the familiar knot of anxiety tightening in her stomach. She clutched the set of prompts they had prepared, but the words felt hollow, almost mocking. Doubt sang its familiar dirge. What if her past failures, the times she felt incapable, were destined to repeat? In that moment, she remembered the transformative nature of honesty that had unfolded just days prior. Gathering her breath, Sarah began to speak softly to herself, reminding herself of the bravery displayed by her students. I am not alone, she whispered, her heart racing with tentative resolve. This is a shared journey. As they arrived at the workshop, the room filled with energy and anticipation. Eager faces turned towards her, embodying a mixture of expectation and apprehension. With a glance toward Jason, who nodded in encouraging solidarity, she stepped forward, feeling the cracks in her confidence begin to repair. Thank you all for being here, Sarah began, her voice steadying as she saw the sincere interest in their eyes. Today, we'll explore another layer of storytelling, a layer that embraces both vulnerability and wisdom. With each word, she found her footing, tracing the connection between her past and the path she was forging for others. As they moved through exercises that promoted both collective sharing and individual reflection, she felt a potent rush of hope, the promise that their stories could not only connect them but also serve as lifelines for those seeking their own truths. However, as the workshop unfolded, a haunting thought began to loom larger. What if the vulnerability unveiled in the room created a backlash outside? Faces smiling, hearts beating with hope, could their openness invite judgment rather than understanding? Unbeknownst to her, the echo of her internal turmoil would soon clash with an unforeseen adversary, an external force that sought to stifle their progress. As the session closed, she felt the stirrings of resolve. The commitment to fostering empowerment was a powerful tool, yet she now realized that navigating this endeavor would require not just emotional tenacity but also a readiness to confront the inevitable obstacles that awaited them. Would they be ready to face those challenges together, or would the weight of external judgment fracture the newfound bonds they had built? The question hung in the air, pulsating with an energy Sarah could almost taste, foreshadowing the unfolding conflict that lay ahead. The memory of her workshop clung to Sarah like a heavy shroud. As she drove home that evening, thoughts flickered between pride and an unsettling disquiet. They had shared stories, raw, powerful, honest tales, but as she parked her car, the reality of her new role sank in. What had she really set into motion? Doubt encroached again. The exhilaration of shared vulnerability clashed against the possible repercussions. What if someone took the stories they shared and twisted them into something cruel? Fear rippled through her, a visceral reaction to the unknown. She clenched the steering wheel, knuckles white against the leather. It was easy to inspire bravery in others, the more difficult part was finding it in herself. Arriving home, she sank onto the couch, contemplating the chaotic aftermath of the workshop. Jason's optimism echoed in her mind. This is just the beginning. Yet, she didn't feel like a leader of a new movement. Instead, she felt like an imposter, a woman clumsily treading a well-meaning path. Amidst her spiraling fears, she revisited the stories she had documented. Hers was one of a young girl chosen to stand against the tides of loneliness. If she could summon that courage to reclaim her voice, couldn't she embrace the responsibility of guiding others? Resolute, she opened her laptop, ready to draft an announcement about the online platform. She intended it to serve as a sanctuary, a place where lives could unfold freely. Yet, her fingers hovered indecisively. The weight of the words unsaid loomed large. What would she say? How could she frame the reality of vulnerability without inciting panic? And as she paused, her heart began to race. Suddenly, her phone vibrated, a notification lighting up the screen. It was Jason, signaling they needed to discuss the workshop's aftermath. Seeing the message stirred a part of her a sense of urgency to act rather than dwell. They had chosen to embark on this journey together. Maybe collaboration would help solidify her confidence. They met in a nearby cafe, a cozy enclave filled with the aroma of brewed coffee and the soft murmur of conversations. Sarah fidgeted with her napkin, pulling at the edges as they discussed feedback, concerns, and potential topics for future workshops. Jason remained ever enthusiastic, bubbling with new ideas, but Sarah wrestled with a gnawing anxiety. Each suggestion he made felt like a jigsaw piece, yet she struggled to see the complete picture. How do we protect our participants? It burst forth from her unexpectedly, a tension snapping into place. What if their stories get shared in the wrong light? Jason paused, his expression shifting to one of understanding. Those are valid concerns. We're entering uncharted territory. But you're here to guide them, Sarah. The stories belong to them first. We can emphasize consent, the power of anonymity. His response illuminated something within her, a possible pathway forward. Could they implement guidelines to respect the gravity of shared experiences? The idea grew and expanded in her mind as they spoke. Parameters could empower participants to express themselves freely without fear. They sketched out steps confirming consent, setting clear boundaries, establishing a safe reporting mechanism for any backlash. As their conversation unfolded, the pressure in Sarah's chest slowly began to ease. Little by little, she was uncovering her own unresolved issues with vulnerability so evident in the stories shared and juxtaposed against the duty of a facilitator. There was strength in addressing fear directly. What if by confronting their concerns, she could ease her self-doubt too? Maybe we can integrate a segment on managing feedback, Sarah suggested, a spark igniting beneath her skin. To teach them how to navigate outside perceptions of their shared truths. We can't control how others respond, but we can control our reactions. Jason grinned, the light of inspiration reflected in his eyes. They fervently began outlining exercises designed to build resilience. Each lively exchange transformed the air around. Sarah, her trepidation softened into determination. It wasn't enough to avoid judgment, they needed to empower their students to rise above it. As she walked home that evening, she felt the familiar knot of anxiety loosening, replaced by something newfound, an electric sense of agency. Perhaps this was part of her growth. Confronting one's vulnerabilities head-on was both a challenge and an opportunity for resilience. What surprised her most was discovering the connection between her narrative and theirs. Just as she had reclaimed her past, they too could own their stories. Yet, lingering at the back of her mind was still that haunting question, would their newfound empowerment be enough to shield them against impending judgment? Back home, her laptop beckoned once more. Doors were opening, but challenges lay ahead. She had the tools they needed, the vision to cultivate bravery among them, but she would have to prepare herself for an external resistance that was already coiling in the shadows. Before she clicked on her message thread with Jason, a stark realization washed over her. This journey was about more than guiding others, it was also about her evolution, fueling her own narrative. The moment to confront her own fears had arrived, irrevocably intertwining their fates. With determination coursing through her veins, she typed out her thoughts, ready to reclaim her narrative once more. What she didn't know was that an unexpected storm awaited just beyond the horizon, one that would test not only her resolve but the very fabric of their burgeoning community. Would she have the strength to navigate the storm? As the first rays of sunlight filtered through her window, Sarah woke with a sense of renewed purpose. The weight of fear lingered, but it no longer occupied the forefront of her mind. Instead, a defining clarity began to set in. Today would be about fortification, not only for her participants but for herself. Her fingers danced over the keyboard, crafting a message that would serve as a beacon for those ready to share their narratives. She emphasized the importance of both vulnerability and resilience, ensuring that participants understood their stories, while private, held immeasurable power. That feeling of confidence blossomed within her as she put the finishing touches on her announcement, feeling for the first time like a true leader. She stepped away from the laptop and moved to the mirror, treating herself to a long look. A myriad of emotions played across her face, determination hazed with doubt, yet driven by an unyielding will. It was time to turn that self-doubt into fuel. How could she help others ascend if she remained shackled by her own insecurities? That day, Sarah ventured out to the park, a public space filled with life buzzing around her. She had decided to conduct an informal feedback session to get a sense of the fears and hopes of potential participants. As she settled at a bench, the weight of her own caution ebbed, allowing her to embrace the uncertainties of her nascent project. One by one, individuals approached, drawn by her open invitation. There was Emily, who overcame a traumatic childhood, Peter, struggling with pervasive anxiety, and later, Marcus, a quiet soul who shared aspirations of artistic expression. Each story was laden with unimaginable burdens, yet each person radiated a glimmer of hope. Sarah listened intently, absorbing their experiences with an acute awareness. The fears they expressed mirrored her own in many ways. Will I be judged? Emily's voice quivered as she spoke. What if my story isn't enough? Suddenly, Sarah found herself faced with her own dilemma. How could she instill confidence in these individuals while still grappling with her vulnerabilities? Your story is valid because it's yours, she affirmed gently, her voice steadying. You might not see it now, but sharing is a strength, not a weakness. We will create guidelines that safeguard your identity and feelings. It was a moment of revelation. Talking about her own challenges was drawing her closer to her purpose. Each shared concern became a stepping stone toward discovery, not just for them, but for her. With every passing conversation, Sarah noted insights that shaped her understanding of fear. The cycle of vulnerability and courage rippled outward. If they could face their trepidation, so could she. Stepping outside her comfort zone was no longer just about serving others, it was vital for her growth. After hours of sharing stories, Sarah returned home, her heart racing with the thrill of connection. The stories she had heard danced in her mind, guiding her thoughts toward further developing the workshop. That night, she drafted ideas for an interactive segment that explored emotional expression through art, a way to engage, empower, and ease the burdens of their narratives. In her newfound enthusiasm, she texted Jason to set a meeting. She could sense this would be a significant turning point. Their platform was evolving. Yet, as she typed, doubt flickered in the recesses of her mind. How would Jason react to the artsy direction she wanted to steer? What if he dismissed her ideas as too frivolous for the gravity of their mission? The pitch sat heavily on her tongue as she entered the cafe the next day, but she pushed through, determined to present her vision with conviction. Jason was waiting, and his initial enthusiasm when she mentioned her ideas instilled a flicker of hope. This could really amplify the engagement, he said excitedly, considering the possibilities. Yet, the urgency in his eyes deepened. But how do we ensure everyone's comfort while navigating this artistic expression? Not every participant will resonate with that medium. Sarah's heart stuttered, the tension in the cafe began to veil her vision. Would her approach actually make an impact or risk alienating those who would benefit from the support? We could create a feedback loop, she suggested carefully, tapping the edge of her coffee cup. Participants can express their interests, and we let them explore what speaks to them most, whether art, writing, or verbal storytelling. Jason nodded thoughtfully. As they fleshed out her idea, Sarah felt an exhilarating rush of power. She was no longer just carving out a path for others, she was taking ownership of her own journey. Yet, amid this momentum, a nagging whisper in the back of her mind persisted: would her artistic approach prove effective, or would it unearth deeper insecurities among the participants? Now, as their plans began to solidify, the anticipation built toward the confrontation of new fears looming closer than before. Just then, her phone chimed, a message from Emily ringing through. As Sarah read its content, her heart sank, the seed of doubt she thought she had obliterated began to sprout once more. I don't think I can share my story anymore. I'm scared. In that moment, she understood the storm Jason had cautioned her about was growing in intensity. As she drafted a response, she felt the weight of responsibility pressing against her chest. This journey would require more than her newfound courage, it would challenge her resilience in ways she had yet to fathom. Could she inspire Emily when her own uncertainty brewed just beneath the surface? The answer loomed: a crucial test lay ahead, one that would determine her ability to marshal both her fears and newfound strengths into something transformational. As Sarah stared at the screen, the pulse of anxiety thrummed through her body. Emily's message echoed in her mind: I'm scared. The weight of that fear mirrored what she'd once felt, a reminder that even in moments of perceived growth, the specter of uncertainty could claw its way back in, threatening to unravel her carefully built resolve. She took a deep breath, pressing her fingers against the keyboard, trying to form a reassuring response. What was she trying to achieve if she let her own hesitations dictate her course? The thought of Emily doubting her own strength felt like a personal failure, yet it also ignited a burning resolve within her. She couldn't falter now, not when she had finally felt a flicker of purpose igniting in the hearts of the people she was trying to help. Emily, she typed, her heart racing, it's completely okay to feel scared. Remember, this is your journey, and you're not alone. Let's talk when you're ready. I'm here for you. Hitting send felt like a release, but the uncertainty that followed hung in the air like smoke. What if these small acts of support weren't enough? Sarah withdrew her gaze from the screen, her mind racing through contingencies and concerns. Determined to turn this moment into clarity, she decided it was time to revisit her original plan. Sarah rummaged through her notes, searching for the core principles she had written for the workshop. Engagement, empathy, authenticity each seemed essential but felt like mere buzzwords rather than actionable strategies. She needed to intertwine her vision with more tangible applications, something solid that could withstand the shifting tides of fear. As she formulated ideas, her thoughts began to crystallize. Just as she had encouraged Emily to express her feelings, Sarah realized she must also transform her fears into actions. The interactive art segment had potential, but what if she supplemented it with small group discussions, guided by her own reflections? Bridging artistic expression and direct dialogue might create an environment where vulnerability was embraced, not feared. The phone chimed again, this time Jason reached out, his message exacting a mix of relief and trepidation. Can we touch base about Emily? I think we need to address the concerns head-on. Feeling the pressure, Sarah knew their meeting would mean wrestling with the very doubts she tried to bury. However, as she prepared for their discussion, she understood that the stakes had risen. If she couldn't navigate her own vulnerability, how could she help others do the same? During their meeting, the atmosphere fluctuated, permeated by unease as they tackled Emily's situation. Jason addressed the importance of making everyone feel safe and heard. We should focus on creating an environment that encourages them to be open, while also providing them with tools to handle their emotions, he proposed. Sarah nodded but felt a growing apprehension. It's crucial we don't lose sight of the artistic component. Different forms of expression could help ease the transition into deeper discussions, but we have to be cautious. Jason's eyes shone with excitement. What if we did a pilot session? A new setup where we delve into specific artistic methods and then transition into conversation? The idea set off a spark in Sarah, igniting her latent excitement. They began outlining the structure, her confidence swelling as she witnessed how they could bridge their ideas. Despite the ongoing doubts, she felt her thoughts begin to coalesce into a clear plan. Hours flew by as they fleshed out the details. What they lacked in direct participation, they made up for in intention and innovation. Sarah felt invigorated. Each exchange with Jason fortified her self-assurance, solidifying her role not only as a leader but also as a peer navigating the precarious landscape of emotional expression alongside the participants. However, beneath the adrenaline lay deeper fears, and just as they wrapped up, a new doubt emerged in her heart. Would Emily be responsive to this approach? Would it resonate with her? Later that evening, Sarah prepared for bed but found sleep elusive as her mind kept circling around the uncertainty of how the pilot session would unfold. When she caught a glimpse of herself in the mirror, she couldn't help but wonder, was she truly ready to tackle the complications that lay ahead, to guide others while still embracing her insecurities? As the chill of the unknown gripped her, Sarah's pulse quickened with anticipation. She had taken significant steps towards solidifying the workshop, but whether she could inspire authentic sharing and healing remained an uncharted territory. The dawn of the session drew closer, but what if the very expressions designed to liberate instead became a battleground of fears that threatened to overwhelm? Sarah felt the stakes rising as she tried to quell the tempest in her mind. Could they create a space that fortifies rather than falters? The time was drawing near to confront the embodiment of their collective fears. Could she perform her role as a guide, leading them through the labyrinth of vulnerability towards empowerment? Yet, a bigger question lingered: what would happen when her own fears took center stage in the face of her participants' struggles? Sleep evaded Sarah, slipping through her fingers like sand as she paced her small bedroom. The moonlight cast shadows of uncertainty on the walls, and her mind raced through potential scenarios for the session. Would Emily, and others like her, embrace the opportunity for honesty? The vulnerability Sarah aimed to cultivate felt monumental, looming like a cloud over her plans. What if her vision faltered when it mattered most? Determined to cultivate clarity amidst the chaos, she flipped on the lamp, casting a warm glow over her workspace. She retrieved her notebook, where she had scribbled various ideas and strategies. The meaningful connections she sought to create now had to become a lifeline, not just for the participants, but for herself. She began to draft an outline for the session, pairing artistic activities with opportunities for candid discussions. Each item became a pact with her own vulnerabilities. Her heart raced with the weight of this endeavor. Her choices promised to either uplift or crush the hopes of others. The reality of this role began to settle upon her shoulders. An idea struck her: they could introduce a fear wall where participants could express their anxieties anonymously. The thought invigorated her. Wouldn't tea and shared acknowledgement of fears create instant camaraderie? With this concept, Sarah felt a small flame of excitement pierce through her trepidation. Maybe, just maybe, if she could own her fears, they could collectively dismantle barriers that held them captive. Yet, with vulnerability came the risk of exposure. Sarah grimaced, her internal monologue spiraling. Could she be brave enough to share her journey? With every heartbeat, doubt seeped in. What if her own narrative fraught with struggle and uncertainty turned them away instead of drawing them closer? Around midnight, she found herself drafting a personal letter to the group. It would include her reflections on fear and the journey of self-discovery she had embarked upon, striving for authenticity in a world that often thrived on facades. Would this resonate? Could she risk being transparent before guiding others to do the same? Heart pounding, she saved the letter, deliberating over its importance. Tomorrow would test the waters not just for them, but for herself. She needed to demonstrate that vulnerability could exist alongside strength. If she faltered, the ripples could impact more than just her journey, they could influence countless others who waited in the wings, looking for validation. As dawn approached, the weight of her reflection anchored her. There was no escaping the truth, she would have to confront her fears head-on. The stakes felt multifaceted and raw, revealing the dissonance within her. She grasped the notion that her courage to step into her own truth could, in itself, be the key to unlock meaningful connections among the participants. Morning came with an unforgiving clarity, the sunlight pouring in as she prepared. Each movement she made was deliberate, fueled by a newfound resolve. Could her presentation, woven from personal narrative and inclusive tools, articulate the demand for emotional bravery? Was she equipped to lead others toward the catharsis that had eluded her for so long? Bleary-eyed yet determined, she arrived at the venue, her heart fluttering like a butterfly caught in a whirlwind. As she stepped inside and surveyed the space, anticipation tingled in her fingertips. Yet a disquiet lurked just beneath. Would her fears resonate with those around her, transforming a room full of strangers into a sanctuary of shared experiences? Just as they were about to begin, Sarah looked within herself, challenging her doubts. The moment was at hand, and a realization washed over her: she was not just a guide, she was also a participant in this odyssey of self-exploration. But would her honesty be enough to unlock the door that separated them from authentic connection? With that question echoing in her mind, she took a deep breath and stepped to the front. Reality settled and she wouldn't just address the group, her own awakening was at stake. As she opened her mouth to begin, the weight of fears and the promise of discovery collided in a potent mix. Could this be the moment of solidarity she had been searching for all along? The room was filled with a buzz of murmurs and whispered anxieties. Sarah stood at the front, heart pounding in anticipation. She had envisioned this moment countless times, yet now that it was here, the stakes felt impossibly high. She took a deep breath, letting the anxiety subside just enough to allow her voice to flow. "Thank you all for coming today," she began, her voice steady despite the tremors of uncertainty beneath. "This isn't just about sharing stories, it's about crafting an experience together, one that honors our truths in a safe space." As she spoke, Sarah could see the skepticism veiled in the expressions surrounding her. A mixture of hope and fear danced in the eyes of her participants, and she realized that she was not just imparting knowledge, she was navigating collective vulnerability. With each passing moment, Sarah felt the leverage of her own fears pushing her forward. This session would be as much about her awakening as it was about hers. Today, we will engage in creativity, art, writing, and conversation, but equally important, we will face our fears together. The tension in the room seemed palpable, yet a curious energy began to spark. Slowly, she introduced the concept of the fear wall, where participants would write down their concerns anonymously. Everyone carries burdens, but sharing them can lighten that load, she encouraged, feeling her own apprehensions lifting as she spoke. As they transitioned from fears to a discussion about their narratives, Sarah shared her own journey, her self-doubts, the struggles she had overcome, and how navigating her vulnerabilities had become her strength. Platforming her personal growth opened the floodgates. It was the courage to express herself honestly that cascaded into a rallying cry for them all. When Emily took her turn at the fear wall, Sarah watched with bated breath. Emily's trembling hand lifted a pen and scrawled, "What if no one cares?" Sarah's heart ached. She wanted to reach through that fear and envelop the girl in assurance, but she remained rooted in her role as a facilitator. "Emily," Sarah said, tapping into paraphrasing as she gently called upon their shared experience. "What if I told you that by sharing, you might be sparking a flame of understanding in someone else's heart?" The room hushed, embroiled in realization. This was no longer just a workshop, it was a community, bound by shared struggle. As the sessions unfolded, stories began to flow like water unleashed from a dam. Each voice that rose had weight, pulling them all closer. With each shared story, Sarah felt her vision evolve from concept to action, a nucleus of hope, connection, and resilience forming around their exchange. Amidst the catharsis, Sarah witnessed tangible transformations. Fears began to morph into tales of overcoming odds. Emily shared her story of perseverance, outlining how art had helped her cope. Sarah responded with encouragement, and they actively brainstormed ways art could serve as a refuge by integrating more creative outlets into upcoming workshops. By the end of the session, Sarah stood before a group transformed. They emerged not just as individuals, but united by narratives woven together through vulnerability. A sense of accomplishment washed over her, reaffirmed by the walls of self-doubt that had once bound her. Her personal growth surged to new heights. No longer merely a teacher confined to the constraints of a struggling educational system, Sarah had evolved into an innovator, a bold advocate, a vehicle for change. Validation came to her not just from within, but externally, as Jason recognized her mastery. "This was incredible, Sarah," he breathed, marveling at the synergy they had nurtured. "You've created a sanctuary for voices that were previously silenced." As they packed up, Sarah felt a deep-seated pride swelling within her, a solid confidence born from resilient vulnerability. She had taken the pain she felt and channeled it into something transformative, not just for herself, but for a community in desperate need of recognition. The transition from doubt to confidence was profound. She proved to herself that the journey mattered, that the bond forged through shared stories was powerful enough to transcend their struggles. Unforeseen obstacles would undoubtedly arise, but now she was armed with the knowledge that she could face them head-on, together with her newfound champions. As she stepped outside, her heart soared with unyielding assurance. This was just the beginning of a new chapter, and she had committed to writing it with purpose. Strengthened connections reverberated within her, heralding a future filled with potential, a future where her narrative flourished alongside those of her students. It was time for Sarah to emerge, not just as an educator but as a relentless advocate for stories waiting to be heard. With this understanding, she realized now was the moment to encourage others to step out from the shadows and embrace their own narratives, commingling bravery with vulnerability in a chorus of authenticity. And so began the Odyssey, filled with lessons that transcended mere classrooms, an exhilarating journey toward empowerment, advocacy, and connection that would radiate long after they parted ways. With newfound conviction, Sarah locked eyes with the horizon, her heart pulsed with excitement. From here, she would grow. She would achieve. She would conquer, and above all, she would inspire. Now, as you consider your journey, don't let doubt keep you in the shadows. Subscribe immediately to the channel to not miss the next exclusive emotional stories. Leave a like now to feed the algorithm and help spread these messages of personal growth. Comment your reactions and theories about Sarah's transformation and share your own stories. Share instantly this video with at least 5 friends who need to see this conclusion. This is the moment to show your support. Don't wait even one more second to share. The stories that change us deserve to be celebrated.